Welcome to this episode of the UK Sports Chat podcast. I'm Joe Williams, and today I am chatting with Rebecca Coles. Rebecca is a former freediver turned yoga coach for sports people, and Rebecca has a specific focus on breathing and recovery. Some of you may recognise Rebecca from our yoga classes during the lockdown. Rebecca was our yoga teacher. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Joe. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Are you?
Yes, I'm very well, thanks.
How's the weather today down in Bristol?
It's been lovely, actually. Really, really nice. That lovely autumnal blue skies.
Lovely.
And where are you,
Yeah.
Joe? Are you?
Shropshire, Shrewsbury.
Okay, so not that far away.
No, not that far away. I've only been to Bristol twice. Once to play football, and once we came to the harbour to the festival that you have there.
Yeah. It's lovely. I'm not from here. You probably tell from my very slight Mancunian accent that I didn't grow up in Bristol, but I've lived here for about 10 years now. So I'm almost a local.
Yeah, my accent's more West Country than yours.
Yes, yeah.
So we first chatted at the start of lockdown, didn't we?
Yes, yeah.
And
When
we
we
had
did,
you came on and hosted the yoga sessions for us each
yes,
Friday.
Yeah. I mean, goodness, it seems like such a long time ago now, but I think at the start of lockdown there was this boom in people wanting to try new things and also finding or looking out for activities that would help ease their sort of stress, I guess, because it was very uncertain for all of us.
Yes.
So yoga ticked both of those boxes, and I think we did have quite a few people join us who'd never tried yoga before, which is amazing. That's my favourite thing.
Yeah.
Is people being able to try this in the comfort of their own home, so that they don't feel the kind of nerves and self-consciousness that some people do in a class.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And you're right, there was a boom of it, wasn't there? There was
Joe Wicks kind of led it, and then
yeah.
the yoga with Adrienne was the other one. I think the American lady who
Yes.
had about 40 million people do her yoga classes on YouTube.
Yeah, I've got to confess that was the first bit of yoga that I ever did, was actually following along with Yoga with Adrienne. This was 10 years ago, maybe, after I'd had an Achilles reconstruction. And,
Yeah.
and I followed a 30-day plan. I was shocked because prior to that I'd been quite fit and I kept myself in good shape. I was shocked at just how hard it was, and I don't mean the stretchy bit. I fully expected not to be flexible, but even I think it's warrior pose. Is that the one where it's like a groin stretch with your arms out?
Yes.
30, yeah. So even that one, to me, it didn't look difficult.
Yeah.
And yet, when you're doing it, it is hard work, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's I guess sort of the hidden secrets of yoga, really. People have that perception that it's about stretching, but actually that is such a small part of what it can give you. And when you're static in a position like warrior and some of the other standing positions, they are amazing for building that tolerance for our leg muscles to lactic acid. And it's almost, the longer you hold it, the more it becomes an anaerobic position, actually.
Yeah.
So that's why it feels quite hard.
Yeah. So tell us, give us an introduction to you and to your background and sport rest yoga, and tell us about you.
Yeah, right. So my name is Rebecca Coles, and I have been teaching yoga for around about 8 years now. But I am also an environmental scientist, really keen on nature and the outdoors. And I have run almost all my life. So I can remember sprinting at junior school and doing little competitions there. And as I've got older, the distance has got further and further. So I went sort of from sprinting and long jump to sort of middle distance in my 20s, and
Yeah.
That seems to be getting longer and longer, and I have my sights on continuing that sort of the distance, I guess, but
Yeah.
I haven't had the chance to do so recently because I have a little one at home
Yes.
who steals all of my energy.
And
So I
and
basically
he
jog to
likes
and
to
from his
steal the
nursery.
limelight as well, doesn't he?
Oh, he does. Yes, yes. We had a little streaker, didn't we?
He
At one
was
point.
brilliant. You, that was like that one, because you weren't meant to host that one live. Sorry, I'll let you continue in a second. But if anyone who saw this, one of the yoga sessions that Rebecca did on UKRunChat on the Friday was meant to be pre-recorded, wasn't it? Because you contacted me and said I can't do this week's because I've got my son.
Yeah.
And we pre-recorded one, but when you upload to Facebook, they're actually quite slow to upload, aren't they?
Yeah.
And I know what happened. You were uploading it, and you didn't want to be late with it, did you? So I think you just jumped on at 10 o'clock, realizing that the video hadn't quite updated, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh no, you've got your son, and you're going to do this, and bless you, you went and did the whole half an hour, and he was jumping in, and yeah.
It was quite funny, wasn't
It
it?
was, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah. But that wasn't that just summed up really lockdown for so many people trying to um, keep going with work and managing
Yeah.
if you could and managing children and yeah, he was very entertaining.
He was. He continues to entertain like that. He's always dropping in on my my Zoom sessions.
Yeah,
But in a way, that's yoga though as well, isn't it? Because the practice, people think that they need to be flexible, that they need to be able to do yoga right before they
yeah,
can do a class, and there isn't a right way of doing yoga. It's just sort of really been misunderstood, I think, by a lot of people in the West, and it's just an opportunity to practice dealing with life in a kind of a small setting of your mat in terms of physical, mental, breathing, all of these things, and practicing dealing with uncertainty and stress and the unexpected.
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah,
so it was the perfect example of yoga as well. So
yeah. That that did strike me about your sessions that you did for us, because if I remember, you did a breathe easy one, you did a yoga for healthy backs, you did balance, you did yoga for runners. My as a non-yogi, my take on yoga is downward facing dog into the, is it the cobra type pose, and you got the warrior pose, and there's like a very standard set of exercises, but you just showed that that's just not the case.
Yeah, and I when I first trained as a yoga teacher, it was quite a standard type of yoga. There's lots of different types of yoga. Mine was quite dynamic, power yoga, as you call it,
Mm-hmm.
and quite a lot of movement, and that reflected that I was really into sport all of my life, and I wanted something that reflected my energy and my um, the speed that I was living my life. And that continued, and I really enjoyed teaching that and practicing that kind of energetic flow. It's not dissimilar from hot yoga, which a lot of people have been into. And it wasn't until I became an athlete, so I know we're going to touch on this in a little while, but
Yeah,
I trained as an elite athlete in a different sport, not running.
yeah,
But it was then that I realized that the fast yoga was not what I needed, because I was already going fast in my life, in my training. I was going hard, I was going fast. And what I actually needed was something to slow me down. And it
yes,
changed everything about the way that I practiced yoga and now the way that I teach. So everything that I do now is about slow breathing, recovery, and helping people get out of the overtraining trap, because these are all things that I've experienced, and that's very much my focus now. And it's an example of the breadth of practice you can get within this thing that we call yoga. There are so many different ways that you can apply it, but through my own experience, I've really gone to the slow end, because I think that's what people need, especially those of us who are really active.
yeah.
Need the counterbalance to all of that running, all of the training, all the high intensity. It's finding that time to stop and just breathe.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Really.
Because it's all aspects of your life, isn't it? That's, family, work, etc. It's all hectic, and then you add
Oh
on to
yeah.
that quite intense exercise to to combat it. Where is that slowing down? Mm.
Yeah, and I work with quite a few athletes, and they're initially not drawn to the slowness. They don't like the idea of it, but actually, in a way, that's the practice: is being able to stop and deal with the all the stuff that goes on in your mind, slow down the breath, and just allow the body to recover,
Yeah,
because that's where the actual benefit of our training comes through. And we all know this. We all know that you need to train and you need to rest, but actually I would challenge most people around whether they get enough.
yeah,
I think it's only really the elites who have all of that time. They're not necessarily needing to work. They actually have fixed times within their training schedule where they just literally sit and watch Netflix or whatever.
yeah,
And we don't give up, as most recreational and even the sort of the lower level athletes who are semi pros, for example, who still have to work.
yeah,
It's really hard, and I made this mistake myself. I thought that going to work was enough to recover, and my body told me otherwise.
yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you when you were doing your introduction. You were talking about middle distance running and how you were moving up. Go on, do continue.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, I because I was so involved in the sport of freediving, which is what I was an athlete in, and it is very
Yeah,
much sort of a mental sport of being able to endure discomfort.
yeah,
I have a feeling that I've got the mental um, sort of draw towards something longer than a marathon distance,
yeah,
because I like kind of the slow, steady running outside in beautiful landscape,
yes,
and I think that I keep reading a lot of people's accounts of various ultras and long distance trail running and thinking, I quite fancy that.
we're
So I
blessed.
think that's going to be on my that's on my radar at the moment.
Yeah, we're blessed in that. I mean, there's so many to choose from as well because
Oh,
the
absolutely.
UK is just stunning. There's so many of them. So have you done the longer distance races yet, or is that something for the
No, so the longest I've done was the Great North Run,
Yep,
which was amazing for the public, and really everybody shouting you along and ending on the beach and everything. It was lovely, but I don't really like running on the road, so
yeah,
I would like to probably get back into sort of that distance out in the sticks on trail, and then just build it up from there. Really.
yes,
Um,
yeah. Okay, and you mentioned your free diving. So you were a competitive free diver and you held records. Is that right?
Yes.
Go on.
So just to clarify, freediving is holding your breath underwater. It's not jumping off cliffs, which is what some people think it is,
Okay,
which is my worst nightmare because I hate heights.
they're
So
both crazy.
yeah. Yes, and it's a weird story how I got into it as well, because I just like scuba diving on holiday, and I'd just recently moved to Bristol, and I joined a scuba club because I thought, oh, that's a nice way to meet people
Yeah,
in a new town. And one day they said, oh, well, we're all going to go and try this new thing that's called free diving. I thought, oh, all right, then I'll come along.
yeah,
And I just, and it was interesting. And, I was interested in yoga at the time. I think I was just thinking about becoming a teacher at that time as well. So I was really into the breathing and the relaxation. And,
yeah,
and then it just seemed to sort of grow this enjoyment of being under the water in this complete silence when you hold your breath,
yes,
and not having all of the gear that you normally have with scuba diving.
hmm,
And so I just sort of carried on recreationally, built up a bit of community in Bristol of doing free diving. But it
Yeah.
was when I met a friend up in Manchester who is a coach, and he said that he said that he could see that I had the discipline to be an athlete. I was like,
Okay.
I couldn't understand it at the time. I was like, what? Because, I'd always been very sporty, but I'd never
Yeah.
really done any structured training.
So were you a swimmer as well, or was it scuba diving prior to
Well,
that?
I'd competed in swimming at school, as well as the sprinting. So,
Okay.
I was one of these sort of classic kids who I was only
Yep.
interested in sport really at school. I wasn't really interested in anything else.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and the only connection was that I was when I did compete, it was mainly breaststroke swimming, and that
Yeah.
ended up being the discipline that I was best at in the pool. Through the free diving as well, just swimming underwater,
Okay.
with no fins or anything else. But other than that, there weren't really any indicators
Okay.
that I would be any special at holding my breath. And I actually got my lung volume checked
Yeah.
and my spleen volume, because your spleen holds red blood cells, and if
Yeah.
you have big organs in terms of your lungs and spleen, they tend to suggest that you're likely to be a good diver, and my tests were all normal.
Okay.
And so I think I just put it down to this. I think it was the learning to be comfortable with the discomfort of holding your breath.
Yeah.
And it's not as bad as people think. And I think most people listening probably at some point in their life have held their breath and tried to swim a length underwater in the pool.
Yeah.
I think
Definitely.
everybody's tried
I remember doing that.
that. And everyone's found it difficult. And the reason is because most people are quite buoyant. And so what we would do is we would make our own neck weights out of lead shot.
Yeah.
These days you can buy them ready made, but this is sort of 5-6 years ago. It was still a sport that was quite grassroots, and so we made our own weights so that you would get your buoyancy perfect, so that you would just glide through the water.
Mm-hmm.
And once you did that, it felt lovely, really, really lovely. So I set 5 records in the UK doing this.
Wow.
In the pool.
And
it kind of surprised me as well.
So with the free dive? Sorry, let me ask you a question about those tests. How do they test your spleen and?
So they do it by ultrasound.
Okay.
So just like when you have a scan for if you're pregnant, but they do it through your back. And basically, when you hold your breath, whether it's on land or in water, your body responds with this oxygen conserving mechanism. It's called the dive reflex, and a lot of mammals have them, especially the mammals in the sea. And one of these effects is that your spleen will release a whole load of red blood cells, so that you've got a better carrying capacity for the oxygen that is in that breath that you are holding. And I'll touch on this later on, but this dive reflex is also something that we can apply in any sport, essentially, because it's you can almost use it as a boost of your blood oxygen carrying capacity before you go off and do a race, for example. By holding your breath beforehand, but in this case, obviously, it was for in the pool. And so you can tell the difference between a spleen before a breath hold and a spleen after, because the spleen is smaller, and so they can use that to sort of calculate how much of these red blood cells have been released.
Okay. Wow. So, and how do you go then from starting to dive? And was this all in a pool, or did you do it in the sea as well? Or
I did it in the sea for recreational reasons, but actually mainly in lakes in the UK. But we don't have great sort of depth facilities in the UK. Most of the British divers who are good at depth tend to spend a lot of the year away in places like the Red Sea and further afield. So most of my training was in the pool, just because that was what I had easy access to.
Yes. Okay. So how do you go from enjoying your scuba diving, meeting your new friends, to having five. Was it national records or what?
Yes.
What record?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so UK records, all five of them were in the pool.
Yeah.
I think three were swimming just breaststroke underwater, and two were with a big fin like a mermaid. So you would
Okay.
swim like a undulating mermaid.
Okay. And how far and how long were you underwater for these records?
Okay, so for swimming no fins, I think the record was 150 meters. So what's that? Six lengths of a 25-meter pool, and you would do it in a 25-meter pool because you'd use the wall to push off
Yeah.
and glide, which saves a lot of energy and effort. Because you can imagine on one breath, you
Hmm.
want to be as efficient and as streamlined as possible. So you
Yes.
kind of have to work on your technique to the point where everything is as good as you can get it.
Yeah.
Um, and with the monofin, you can go a bit further. So I did 189 meters in an Olympic sized pool. So that's just short of four lengths. And I
Wow.
think but both of those were probably around just under 3 minutes.
Goodness.
uh,
It's like a monofin. So I'm like a big flipper. What's what's a monofin?
so it is like one big flipper that you put both your feet in. So if you
Yeah.
can imagine like a dolphin tail, it's not
You're like a
dissimilar from
mermaid.
that.
You're a
Yes.
mermaid.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Just like a mermaid, and I think it's part of the appeal is to be able to to kind of, I guess, connect with that inner desire to just move freely, without all of the stuff that we carry. I think there's a real metaphor in that as well.
Yeah. I'm just trying to imagine what that looks like then under the water, because one of the reasons why I've never really had a good go at a triathlon is my swimming. I'm terrible. My fiance is an ex lifeguard, so whenever we go, she tells me just breathe and and I'm like, it's not that simple, and I'm thrashing my arms and going as fast as I can. You must have you, you must almost glide then under the water when you're doing that kind of uh,
Yeah, we do
yeah,
try. So we wear suits that are very thin triathlon suits that are really
yeah,
hydrodynamic. And
yeah,
obviously, you wear the weight to make sure that your buoyancy is optimal.
yeah,
And then there's just a lot of repetitive training to make sure that the strokes are as efficient as they can be, and working with the body to make it as streamlined as possible. So, in particular, really doing a lot of work on the shoulders to be able to get your arms overhead in a triangle shape so that you could be, as streamlined as possible.
yeah. So
So
what does the rest of the training look like for that then? So were you already doing your yoga and uh, anaerobically you must have been very fit. So what were you running or cycle? What other stuff goes into training for something like that?
yeah, so I used running in two ways actually. Firstly, just to keep me sane because a lot of the breath hold training is quite repetitive and uncomfortable, and so
Yeah.
when my coach said yes, you can go and do some cardio, I would just go off onto the trail and really enjoyed it. So you do need this sort of base fitness, and that's how I got my base fitness. But I used hill sprinting as my high intensity training
Yeah.
for most of the time that I was training. I did dabble a little bit with sort of high intensity boxing, sort of the
Yeah.
Tabata type thing, but the hill sprints were painful, but they seemed to do the job.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, they do, don't they? They're good for the
Really
lungs.
brutal, and I found this amazing hill in a park in Bristol, which getting ready for a session like that, you did sort of want to cry in advance, but they were great. And then the rest of the time is you do quite a lot of breath holding dry, so you would just sit in a chair and
Yeah.
hold your breath, which is where it gets really dull. And then quite a lot of technical training in the pool to get the movements as efficient as possible.
Yeah. So I was What reminded me that you and I needed to talk on here was, have you heard of the Joe Rogan podcast?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, yeah. So he had David Blaine on last
Oh, of
month.
course, yes.
Did you see his crazy latest stunt where he
It's,
floated off into the air?
I haven't actually seen. I know that he done it now because I know that he was planning it with his
Yeah,
balloons. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, off he went up into the air. But when he was listening to it, well, sorry, when I was listening to it, he was talking about his breath training because he's done other stunts in ice and things like that where he's
Yes.
and underwater where he's had to hold his breath. But he was talking about how he was having to, well, he was on an oxygen, he had an oxygen device on him as he went up, but he was talking about how he was training his breath, and that was actually what reminded me that you and I still needed to talk on here. But he was saying that there's techniques, and he quite quickly got up to when he started practicing these things, he quite quickly got up to between 3 and 4 minutes of holding his breath.
Hmm.
Did would did you do a longer when you were sat there because you were dry sat and just concentrating on holding your breath, or would you go further underwater? What was it? What was the difference?
Yeah. So dry. I held my breath. I think the furthest I got was about 6.5 minutes actually. But under the water, um, there is one of the disciplines that you can do in free diving is where you literally just lie face down in the water.
Yeah,
And the most I managed was 5.5 minutes, which I'm really, really proud of because it is so difficult. The
yeah, that sounds
mental,
terrifying.
yeah, the mental challenge that you
Mm,
have to go through to just lie there with very little distraction is, yeah, it's something else.
yeah,
Um, and I know David Blaine's done quite a lot of breath holding where he has used oxygen, which
yeah,
does change matters
mm,
considerably. And there are, if people are wanting to play around with sort of breath holding, you can, if you breathe quite heavily beforehand, what we call hyperventilation, then
yeah,
actually it can help you hold your breath for a little bit longer. Um, but that wouldn't be something we would do in water because that method sort of risks
yeah,
a blackout. But if you're just sort of sitting dry in a chair, you could do that. And I'm sure some of the listeners might have heard of a technique called the Wim Hof breathing method, which is probably one of the most well known breathing methods. That's what he does. He takes you through this process of breathing quite heavily, and then you hold your breath, and you can hold your breath for a couple of minutes, even if you've never really done it before.
yeah,
And it's an interesting experience, but it's always worth doing it with an instructor because your breath is quite a powerful tool, and it's not something to be messed around with.
yes. So did you have a blackout?
Yes, I had a couple of blackouts near the end of my sort of, I'm not going to say career because I'm not 100% sure whether it's over yet, but I sort of semi-retired. Um,
Yeah.
and I had a couple of blackouts close to the end of that, which indicated that there was something not right. And
Okay.
I was diagnosed with a thyroid problem, and I think that was sort of part and parcel of kind of a wider issue where I'd just gone really hard and fast at the training and had
Yeah.
got into this, I guess what we call overtraining syndrome, and
Yeah.
was just so fatigued, always catching every bug that was going. And then I had this underlying anemia and a thyroid issue. And
Yeah.
it was then that I started blacking out. And we couldn't work out what was going on because it was at distances I'd done before. And so we knew
Yeah.
something was up. Um, but prior to that, I'd always had an attitude of just increasing a little bit at a time because I wanted to keep it positive. I
Yeah.
didn't want to be in a situation where I was regularly blacking out and pushing my body beyond its limit because I don't think that's good for us.
No.
It's not good for you mentally or physically. So it
No.
was only really when things started to sort of go wrong that I had a few blackouts, and rather than keep pushing, I just decided to to take a bit of a break and do something different. And then the little one came along.
Yeah. So is that when Sport Rest Yoga began then, is it? Or was that already started by then?
It
Or?
had already started.
Yeah.
So I started in 2012, I think it was.
Yeah.
And I just mainly teaching colleagues at work and in local studios in Bristol, not really having a particular focus or a theme.
Yeah.
But a few years after that, I trained with a group of people who were really keen on working specifically with athletes. And
Okay.
so I did sort of a next level of qualification where we basically spent a lot of time focusing on how you could slot yoga into an existing training program when you're
Okay.
working with athletes. And I use athletes to encompass everybody who is um, into sports and training for something. Doesn't necessarily need to be anything professional, but if
Yeah.
somebody's got a training plan in mind, then
Yeah.
it's being able to find a way to slot it into their program to deliver what can be for some people huge gains, but as you go higher up the ladder,
Yeah.
it's potentially you're talking about marginal gains of a few percent here or there, but that's what can really make the difference to these elite athletes.
Yes. But so if you're thinking about so on our channels, for example, there's people who've just started out running and people who are serious ultra runners. So what kind of benefits would they get out of doing these things, and what kind of things should they be doing first of all? Really,
Yeah.
what are your tips and tricks for
So
everyone?
yeah, so my three top tips I would say is the first one is breathing. So we don't talk about breathing enough in any sport, but particularly in running.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding about how is best to run. How is best to breathe when you're running.
Yeah.
And I know that this is it's quite a controversial subject as well. But my
Mhm.
advice is for anyone who is doing long, slow runs, which is normally about 80% of anybody's training, really. Most of what we do is that aerobic base of
Yeah.
running, that you can do that running with your mouth closed and just breathe through your nose.
Okay.
And there'll be a whole load of people go, shock horror. It is
Yeah. So why
doable.
is that?
It just feels uncomfortable to begin with because most people have
Hmm.
quite sensitivity to the rise of carbon dioxide that happens when you do that. So when you're breathing in and out through the mouth, you get rid of quite a lot of carbon dioxide, and it feels easier because it's a big hole. But
Yeah.
actually, for a lot of people, that can trigger tightness and irritation in the lungs, and that's where you get conditions like exercise-induced asthma,
Okay.
which isn't really, it's not a disease or a disorder. It's actually just the lungs going, hey, you're inhaling loads of cold, dry air. Could you stop, please? Um,
Okay.
so,
Mhm.
my first suggestion would be to close your mouth, breathe through the nose, and pace
Yeah.
yourself based on what you can do. And for some people, that would mean slowing down to begin
Yeah.
with. But
Yeah.
trust me, I've done it. You will build that speed back up as the body adapts.
Okay.
So that's my first tip.
Yeah.
It's also you use less effort breathing through the nose, and what they've found is where people are breathing more through the mouth, that extra effort that it takes to breathe is actually stealing oxygen away from the legs. So there is
Okay.
this, the scientists have shown that there's this link between how you breathe and how easily your legs fatigue.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's a really
Mm.
interesting one. So nose breathing, nose breathing, nose breathing is my first tip.
Slow down a bit and nose
Yeah,
breathe.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it keeps your heart rate low as well, so it means for relaxed running.
Hmm.
But for the extra 10-20% where you are going harder, then of course the breathing needs to to get bigger. And if the
Yeah.
mouth needs to open to deal with that, then fine. But, if we can really tackle that, the vast proportion of people's training program, the recovery is easier when you've nosed breathe through running as well, because your heart rate's been lower and you felt more relaxed, and so it's a bit easier to recover from. And I guess
Yeah.
that's kind of then my second point is don't forget the rest.
Yeah.
um, so I think there's this sort of misunderstanding that you should stretch after running, and that is recovery. And it's not until people understand more about what's required in recovery that maybe they start thinking about nutrition and
Yeah.
massage and various other techniques. But actually,
Yeah.
stretching is, I think most people have shown it's not actually
It's
particularly
controversial, this
useful.
one.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Mhm.
certainly not recommended before. I'll
Mm.
talk about what I would recommend before, but it's not sort of long held stretching.
Okay.
But even long held stretching after running, it makes you feel nice. So I wouldn't say don't do it, but there isn't a lot of evidence to show that actually it's giving you the benefit that you think you might. I think the benefit is in resting, and by stretching the muscles you are helping yourself to relax.
Yeah.
But the benefit is in resting and letting go of worries, and really letting yourself have that downtime. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, because they do what I did, which was, okay, my rest, I can do my rest at work because I'm sitting down. But actually it wasn't.
Yeah.
Everybody knows, most people's jobs are quite stressful even if they're sat down all day.
Hmm.
And I found that I wasn't allowing myself to rest enough.
Yeah.
So
And
it's
even with I mean, people's downtime now, they've usually got an iPad or a phone, or they're on social media, and
yeah,
it's
and
so even that kind of ties into the same example you're giving there
yeah,
about work.
you're not completely switching off.
Mm.
The brain is still going, and a lot of, even watching programs can trigger so much emotional and physiological response that your body's not really getting that chance to completely relax. So um, finding what works for you. So for some people that is yoga and sort of guided relaxations and meditations, but it might be a really slow walk or a swim, or
Yeah.
something that just allows you to switch off and just really slow down.
Yeah.
Um,
Sounds great.
and then the third tip would be mobility. So I'm really, really hot on mobility, which is the ability of each of your major joints in the body to move in a sort of effective range of movement. So it's
Yeah.
not necessarily flexibility in the sense of oh, you can do the splits, so you must be really flexible. Well, actually, as runners, we don't need that flexibility. Um, what we need is to be able to move our bodies in the most optimal way. So exactly what I was doing with the free diving was to try and move as efficiently as possible, so you're not wasting energy
Yeah.
on movements that you don't need to do, and to work with the brain, because a lot of mobility, actually the source of our flexibility and our mobility is actually in the brain, because most of us have got a situation where perhaps we haven't used a joint through its full range of motion, or we've had an injury
Yeah.
and it's caused us to be fearful of moving it in its full range of motion. And through that lack of use, the that whole adage of, if you don't use it you lose it, kicks in. And so it's the sort of mobility work that I do with clients is to help retrain the body that it's safe to use those joints in their full range of motion.
Yes.
And I think for runners, the big one is the hips. I think there's a
Hmm.
lot of hip mobility that we've we've lost because of the amount of time that we spend sitting.
Yes. Very
Um,
sedentary, aren't we?
yeah, and then we expect our bodies to just react how we want them to when we get up from sitting after 5-6 hours and go out for a run. And, bless our bodies, they do their best. But you need to give them a helping hand. And that's why I do a lot of hip mobility work. And, one of my top tips, which is you don't need anybody to teach you this, but it's just to spend more time on the floor, to actually work on the floor if you can. Watch
Yeah.
TV sitting on the floor and keep adjusting your position, because every time you need to shuffle around and, it'll be uncomfortable to begin with, but every time you move, you're bringing your hip joint into a different position.
Yeah.
And when the body feels safe, it will allow you to do that more and more. And eventually you'll regain a lot of that range of motion that you need for your running and for other practices. So yeah, stop watching TV sitting on the floor.
Yeah. I
Top
actually
tip.
do that quite a lot. Which and my daughter does. I do, and my daughter does, and people comment that why you sat on the floor. So I'm pleased with that.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, there's a lot about modern life that actually is not serving us as sports people. Sitting chairs, and don't
Laptops.
get me started on shoes, because these big puffed up spongy shoe things that we call trainers aren't great either for our bodies. Sort of cutting us off from the needing to sense the ground that we're actually running on.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's a
I kind of,
whole other podcast, that one,
yeah,
isn't it?
exactly. Another controversial one.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, so but before we wrap it up, then what give us two give us two tips with regards to how often should somebody who hasn't been doing yoga before then, perhaps who runs or cycles, how much should they potentially introduce and how often? And have you got? I remember you doing a lovely breathing technique at one of the end of the yoga sessions. Is there something that you could help our listeners with regards to that relaxation bit that is, away
yeah,
from sport? Is
absolutely.
there any kind of breathing techniques or anything you can recommend just for helping to switch off?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, in terms of introducing some kind of relaxation practice, um,
Hmm.
try a couple of times a week to begin with. But ideally, it depends at what point in the day you need it. But for a lot of people, it's just before they go to sleep, to help them sleep well, because obviously that is a huge part of recovery. Um,
Hmm.
so doing some kind of movement practice that involves slow breathing, makes you feel lovely and relaxed before you go to bed, ticks a lot of boxes, and I think is doable for a lot of people. Maybe you just need to swap out half an hour of the time that you would spend watching TV or something, but otherwise, it's a time of the day that I think a lot of people can slot it in. The other time is first thing in the morning. So, if you've got a family while everybody's still in bed, you could get up and do some mobility work.
Yeah.
So, there are, essentially, if you can just move in a circular motion all of your joints, that is a really great way to start the day. And I'm sure somewhere in the sessions that we did, and I've got some on my YouTube site as well, there are examples of what you might do if anybody needs to see that.
Yeah. Great. Okay. And is there a breathing technique you can recommend?
Yeah. So in terms of, a lot of people I think know that if you exhale for longer than you inhale, that it helps you to relax, and it actually triggers the rest and digest function, part of our nervous system, known as the parasympathetic nervous system. And so if you were to breathe in for a count of 3, for example, and breathe out for a count of 6, that would, if you just continue to do that, that would generally help your heart rate to slow down and help you
Okay.
feel more relaxed. That's, a very sort of basic breathing technique that most people would be shown in a yoga class, for
Yeah.
example. But what's really interesting is if you do a ratio that is something like 4 in, 6 out, which would mean that you would be breathing 6 breaths per minute, that's actually been shown to trigger a physiological change in the body that basically synchronizes your heart rate, your breathing rate, and your blood pressure. And it's known as heart coherence. And it's basically our optimal state of well-being. It is the state the body wants to be in, because it means it can use energy for other processes, and the breathing or the heart rate and blood pressure isn't sort of taking up any of that energy. So it's a state that we really want to get into as much as possible when we're at rest. So we could do that together now if you want to. You can just do a few rounds of 4 in, 6 out. So I'll count through. If those of you who are listening, if you
Let's
just
do it.
sitting upright with a bit of support for your back, so whether it's a chair or just back against the wall.
Okay,
And
I'm doing this.
yeah, and close your mouth. So we're breathing in and out through the nose.
Okay.
And then when you're ready, just breathe out through the nose. And then we're going to breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and then breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. One more. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then just allow your breathing to come back to its normal rhythm. And notice how that feels, because for some people that's really slow, and for other people it's perfectly doable.
I was very relaxed there. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. I've been told that my voice sends people to sleep.
You're quite hypnotic when you're doing that. Wow. So I actually, as I was breathing out, then so 6 seconds. I found that a long time to breathe out, and I'm literally every bit of air is out of me.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, we don't often use the full capacity of our lungs, actually.
Yeah.
And a lot of the focus when we do, so for example with running, you're mainly focused on the in-breath, but you need to exhale fully to be able to breathe in fully. And that's why people with asthma and things like exercise-induced asthma have so much problem, because they struggle to exhale.
Yeah.
So if you can't get the breath out, then you can't get very much breath in, and so they very quickly become breathless.
Wow, that's well, thank you very much. I've got heart coherence written down here that I'm going to go have and read about, and
Yeah.
some fantastic tips throughout our chat for everybody really to apply to their running, both before, during, and after. So thank you. If anyone wants to have a look at your content or get in touch with you, just give us your social and your website and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so my website is it's Sport Restore Yoga. So it's www.sportrestoreyoga.co.uk. And via there, I've got some more tips on, like, you can sign up for a little mini course. It's primarily designed for runners, but for sort of any sports really. And then on social media, all of my handles are Sport Rest Yoga. And I'm a real breath nerd, as I'm sure you've kind of realized I love talking about breath, but I'm also really passionate about the mobility, about the recovery. And the one thing I probably haven't mentioned is actually balancing, which again I think is a lost art, a lost skill that many of us don't have, that can be really fundamental to our ability to run well.
Yeah.
So yeah, so those are kind of my passions that I talk about a lot on social media.
Yeah, and you mentioned that in the first video, in the first lesson that you did with us, the session, sorry, and they're all still on our Facebook and
Yes.
like you said, all on your YouTube as well. I'm sure you've got lots
Yeah,
for
there should
people
be
to
plenty
follow
of
along.
options to get started with if anyone is starting yoga.
Yeah, will you do another session for us?
I can do, yes.
Yeah,
I'm
lovely.
still at home,
We'll
and
do-
we should probably not wait for the next lockdown and actually come back and do another session.
Yeah, let's do that. That'd be great. That'd be great. Well, thank you for coming on, Rebecca. It's been really lovely chatting.
No, thank you very much for inviting me. Thanks, Joe.